Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this latest teaching session on the course on technology and the future of medicine. This session is entitled The Technological Singularity Explained and Promoted. And it will have various emotional periods. In the middle part of this presentation, you get deeply, deeply depressed. And then I'll bring you out of that, and hopefully you'll end on a happy, optimistic note. Just kind of warning you that it's not that we go deeper and deeper, and by the end you're in a really bad state. So the objectives are to understand that we should not fear complexity. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but real life is complex. We all value real experiences, real life, and we should not be seeking the one great simple truth or assume that truth remains immutable or truth doesn't change. There are many truths and they can be true concurrently even if they seem to be in conflict. Then I'm going to tell you about the three main schools of belief about the singularity, the four main paths, and tell you about the history of the singularity and Marcus Hutter's main ideas about it. Marcus Hutter stands in a position exactly the opposite of David Pearce. When you have the teaching session with David Pearce loves the interaction with you guys. You'll be looking at him eyeball to eyeball for 80 minutes, this famous philosopher, and the only person enjoying it more than you will be David Pearce. He really enjoys the interaction with this class. Marcus Hutter hated the interaction with this class, didn't want a video of him together with the people in this class, but he's a really significant intellectual presence in this whole field of artificial intelligence and the future. And if you talk to any AI people you know, they'll tell you he's an outsider. He's not one of them. He doesn't go to the same meetings and so on. So he's really quite an independent thinker. He prepared a full lecture for this course, which we have on that PowerPoint with audio. And I think we should feel very fortunate to have that. Finally, toward the end, I'm going to talk to you about the challenge of promoting the singularity and the idea behind the new holiday of Future Day. If you haven't heard of Future Day before, that's okay, because it is known to very few people, but we're one of the few cities in the world that is celebrating Future Day on March 1st. So do not fear complexity. There's beauty in complexity. The real world is complex. Some of your most successful experiences in life will be where others have thought an area was too complex to be approached, and you have entered it anyway and fixed things. So that's a very common way in which success comes, particularly success to young people. Think about the field of transplantation, for instance, which is my field. There are all these ways in which you can think of a theme for the future, and they seem to be completely in conflict. They seem to be different from each other. They can't all be true. One is the rather old-fashioned idea that deceased donor donation becomes popular and completely successful worldwide, and we get rid of the waiting list that way. The other is through something called immunological tolerance. Third way is through tissue engineering and repair, fixing diseased organs. And the fourth way is through creation of new organs from stem cells. And you might say, well, okay, well, choose one. What is the future? The actual future will be kind of a multi-threaded combination of those four things. And many other situations in life are like that. So it's very complicated, but it's a little bit simpler when you figure out that, yes, all those factors are actually operative at the same time. Putting it Another way, Peter Diamandis, the chancellor of Singularity University, the CEO of the X Prize Foundation, the person responsible largely for private space flight and autonomous vehicles and a whole host of other things, says, when faced with a choice between two desirable goals, choose both. Why not? You've seen this slide before. You'll see it again. I want to make sure you sort of understand this alarming concept, which is the idea of machines becoming smarter than we are. If you think about everyday experiences, the last time you made a phone call, people don't make phone calls very often anymore. Your cell phone, as you know, is no longer for phone calls. It's for other higher tech things, and you very seldom actually speak into your cell phone. But the last phone call you made was likely to an automated attendant. Maybe you thought you were going to get a real person, but you'd get a machine. And in the past, that was always unsatisfactory. And more today, not only is it satisfactory, but it's faster, better in every way than if you had reached a real person. And there are many other day-by-day experiences you have that confirm this idea that machines are taking over more and more agency that used to be solely the sphere of human beings. They're getting progressively more intelligent, and the idea here is that in 2029, which is 14 years from now, that they'll be as smart as individual humans. And in 2045, they'll be as smart as the whole aggregate human race. And from that point onward, machines will be in charge of the future agenda of the world. And we can only influence or understand that if we cooperate or collude or merge with them in some way. It's a very shocking idea. The time course may be different, but I think it's very unlikely that it won't occur at all. Even skeptics, even people with very different points of view, even not very technology advocacy-prone people, do think that this is going to happen. The word singularity comes from physics and refers to the fact that you can't predict what happens afterwards. It's such a dramatic change, it's sort of a break in the fabric of human history, and we cannot predict what will happen afterwards, and that's exactly the same as approaching a black hole in physics. So you end up in a situation where you cannot predict the future. The singularity depends upon Moore's law, price performance of computing, and this has been a smooth exponential curve now for some time, since about 1900. It predicts the things I've just told you, that very soon machines will be as smart as a rat or a mouse, and so on and so forth. There are, of course, hardware and software considerations. We'll talk a lot about that in this course. Trying to find a common reference, something familiar to everybody. Most people know Alice in Wonderland. In Alice in Wonderland, a world is confronted that's much more organic than expected. Everything's alive. Everything is an animal. The Crotte mallet is actually a flamingo, and you remember this sentence: the main difficulty Alice had was in managing her flamingo. Not only was the mallet alive, the ball was alive, everything was alive. Biology was absolutely everywhere in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. We face a future that is exactly the opposite of that, potentially. In the technological singularity, we face a world that is much less organic than expected, and could develop without us, perhaps doesn't need us. Perhaps as that world evolves, we are sort of the limiting factor. We're holding everybody back. That could somehow be the case. One of the reasons to create a course like this is to figure out how these changes can be massaged, be shaped in a positive way, so that somehow human beings, our species, come out on top. So there are three main schools of belief about the technological singularity. They are accelerating change, where things just get faster and faster and faster. The analogy with physics, the black hole of physics, and that's the event horizon view, and then the idea of intelligence explosion. Now, the PowerPoint that I've provided you with a link to Marcus Hutter is called Can Intelligence Explode? So it's dealing mainly with this third school of belief, intelligence explosion. Within each of those schools, there are four main paths. One is the creation of artificial intelligence that exceeds human intelligence. Then there's the idea of combining biology and machines. The cyborg build human-computer interfaces that allow humans to go beyond their innate intelligence to a significant extent. Cybernetic singularity. Then there's the idea of doing it through biology only, doing it entirely through biology. Find ways in biology to improve upon natural human intellect. And then the fourth path is where the internet basically comes alive. One day you turn on your computer and the internet starts talking to you and you realize that it's way ahead of wherever you are at that point. So you build large computer networks which are beyond human intelligence. Now, all these different variations in the belief in the singularity are reflected in the courses at Singularity University. So they have both a summer graduate course and then they have shorter executive courses. I took the 9-day executive course in the spring of 2010. And it's unlike a lot of educational experiences. You know, you take a course and the day after the exam, you've already forgotten some of it, and you know, a month or two later, you maybe have a third of the knowledge you gained in that course, and eventually, your whole life history of that course is just a little tiny blip in knowledge, maybe with little retained effect. These 9 days of my life were entirely different from that. It sort of changed everything and made everything thereafter different, gave me a kind of network of people around the world that I could talk to about these things, and is an experience which grows and grows after you finish the course. So here's a picture of my class. See, I'm way older than the other people. Most of them are students, entrepreneurs, you know, government officials. I was the only full-time university faculty member there. For a long time, I've been arguing that we need a new cross-disciplinary structure in universities to better prepare us for the future. So I was lecturing about this as if I expected the audience to make this happen. And one day, I looked in the mirror and it occurred to me, since I'm a full-time university person, that maybe the person I'm looking for to do this was actually me. So that's how I came to start this course. It became apparent the best way to make this happen was to create a novel course of new design, and that's the course that you're taking. Presently, we know of no other similar courses in the world other than Bertalan Metzko's Social Media and Medicine course in Budapest, Hungary. His course is different in a number of ways, meets only, I think, one time a week. He's just turned 30, but he's packed an amazing amount of life experience in 30 years. And at various times we've had cooperation and interaction between the students in his course and in ours, so that may happen again this term. We're not trying to keep this selective and only present in a few places. Eventually, I would hope that there'd be hundreds of similar courses appearing in universities all over the world. We talk about a lot of dysphoric, unpleasant potential outcomes. It's always important to keep in mind the idea of the post-scarcity abundance world, where the cost of everything valuable approaches zero, where you can have any experience you want, where virtual reality is better than real reality and can be shared with friends, and life is wonderful. So that is as likely as all the terrible, horrible things we talk about, and you sitting in these seats will be able to some extent, influence what kind of outcome we have finally. Now, when you're at a party in an evening, sometime it will happen to you. You'll hear somebody talking loudly about Ray Kurzweil, arguing with his views and saying that he's, an idiot and he holds these rigid views about this and that. You have to realize that since 1998, Ray Kurzweil's main activity has been to respond to people criticizing his work. His 2005 book is basically putting it in book form, that's kind of organized thinking that he had been going through to answer back to people who had been criticizing his work. And he's accessible, he's reachable. You can write to him and he'll write back. And so the idea that he's rigid is not the case. If you were to write to him with any criticism in this area, he'll partially agree with you. He will point out some facet of it you never thought about before and give you some brand new insights. So he is as broad as everything I've talked to you about thus far. He's capable of accepting all those various points of view. And so any argument that purports that he holds narrow, rigid views is a false straw man argument. Okay, so now the history in this area I think is a little bit amusing. It goes back a long way, actually, to R. Thornton, the editor of a periodical you may not have heard of before. I'm sure you know of all the main periodicals, but you don't know this one. Expounder of Primitive Christianity. I bet you've not encountered that one before. He was writing about the recent invention of a 4-function mechanical calculator. You push keys and magically the answer, a number, comes. And he said, such machines by which the scholar may, turning a crank, grind out the solution of a problem without the fatigue of mental application, would, by its introduction into schools, do incalculable injury. But who knows that such machines, when brought to greater perfection, may not think of a plan to remedy all their own defects and then grind out ideas beyond the ken of mortal mind. So there you see the idea of machines becoming smarter than we are even in 1847. Now in 1863, 4 years after Darwin published On the Origin of the Species, Samuel Butler published a letter, it was a little bit humorous, captioned Darwin among the Machines. It compares human evolution to machine evolution, prophesizing half in jest that machines would eventually replace man in the supremacy of the earth. In the course of the ages, we shall find ourselves the inferior race. And the letter raises many of the themes now being debated by proponents of the technological singularity. And Butler, in 1872, in the book Erewhon, which you will immediately recognize as nowhere spelled backwards, right? So that's where that word comes from, argued that there is no security against the ultimate development of mechanical consciousness in the fact of machines possessing little consciousness now. A mollusk has not much consciousness. Reflect upon the extraordinary events which machines have made during the last few hundred years, and note how slowly the animal-vegetable kingdoms are advancing. The more highly organized machines are creatures not so much of yesterday as of the last 5 minutes, so to speak, in comparison with past time. Okay, so the next 22 slides, believe it or not, are from Marcus Hutter. They go a bit faster than he does, and I'm leaving out some of the ideas, probably because I don't completely understand them as well as he does. And by the end of the 22nd slide, you're going to be deeply, deeply depressed. But there's slides beyond that that will pull you back from the brink, and so you will survive this lecture. So here goes. So this is from his talk from 2012 of Can Intelligence Explode? So the history in this area, there are a number of people always quoted. Stanislaw Ulam was perhaps the first one to come up with this concept of the technological singularity. Then there was I.J. Good and Ray Solomonoff and Werner Vinge, who's a current author now. In 1993, he wrote a very good science fiction book on this. And Ray Kurzweil then has been responsible for the widespread popularization of the idea. There have been events. Probably the best attended is the Singularity Summit. And as of about 3 years ago, there were multiple different singularity-associated entities and conferences and this, that, and the other thing. And then the Singularity University, you know, in California, there's this benign for-profit where you can become for-profit but feel really good about yourselves because you're using all the money for goods. So that's what they did. They became this benign for-profit entity, and they basically bought up everything else except us. So we're still, you know, independent, but they bought up Singularity Summit and Singularity Hub and Singularity Institute. So now there are really very few entities out there, and the Singularity University owns most of them. This is Moore's Law, just a different depiction of it in terms of price performance of computing, calculations per second per $1,000. And you can see the progress then, pretty much during your lifetime, because you will all be alive in 2045. You may not think you will, but you will. So actually in your lifetime, the machines have gone from manual calculation, kind of bacteria, worm, spider, lizard. We're probably somewhere in the lizard phase now, and soon we'll be in the mouse phase, and then in 2029, the human brain equivalent. Superintelligence, by Moore's Law, the computing power doubles every 1.5 years. It's now been valid for over 50 years. So long as there is demand for more computing power, Moore's Law could continue to hold for more decades before computronium is reached. Computronium is where everything is turned into basically computing, where you turn the whole universe into computing. In 20 to 30 years, the raw computing power of a single computer will reach 10, 15, 10, 16 flops per second, and that's the computational capacity of the human brain. So in theory, we'll have human-level AI in 20 to 30 years. There's always the wild card, isn't there? When you read the papers, you listen to the latest news about ISIS in the Middle East and beheadings and stuff like that. There is always the possibility of something that could interfere with this, but it's probably not very likely to be interfered with. One can conjecture that the software will not lag far behind, so hardware and software will both progress over this period. And you can imagine that there will also be an acceleration of the doubling patterns. Right now, in this computer-dominated world, price performance of computing doubles every 1.5 years. You can imagine with superhuman intelligence, let's say from 2045 on, that it might double every month. So it would be a very rapidly accelerating intelligent world. You can think of various phases of this, 6 phases. Epoch 1 is physics and chemistry, 2 is biology, 3 is brains, 4 is technology, 5 is the merger of technology and human intelligence. So what's going to happen between 2029 and 2045? Approximately, and Epoch 6 is where computronium is everywhere and the universe wakes up and is entirely used for computation. Is this inevitable? Is it negotiable? Is it something we can step back from? Can we be refuseniks and say, well, we're not going there? Is that practical? Well, probably not. The appearance of AI plus is kind of the ignition of a detonation cord towards the singularity, towards a point of no return. Maybe the singularity is already unavoidable at this moment. Politically, it is very difficult, but not impossible, to resist technology or market forces. It would be similarly difficult to prevent acute general intelligence research, and even more so to prevent the development of faster computers. Whether we are before, at, or beyond the point of no return is also philosophically intricate, as it depends upon how much free will one attributes to people in society. Now, in past years, when I reached this free will bit, I just slipped right past it. But free will is a really big issue, and we've never addressed it head on. But this year, Earl Wah, who's sitting right over there, is going to give us an entire teaching session on free will. So you'll know more about free will than you know right now, that's for sure. And it's a very important issue. I mean, we talk in this course about shaping the future, but if we live in a completely deterministic world where everything is already determined, we're really just faking it. We think we're shaping the future, but actually we're just following the plan of pretending to shape the future while we're actually not doing anything of the kind. So I think free will is a very important thing to discuss. So you can think of analogy 1, politics and the inevitability of global warming. So it's sort of like that. Can we pull back? Can we entirely prevent global warming? Probably not. And this is similar. The other is a physics analogy. You can think of a spaceship close to an event horizon. It might, in principle, escape a black hole, but it's doomed in practice because it doesn't have enough propulsion to get away. It would be sucked into the black hole. This is traditionally one of the hardest slides to understand, so I'm not going to spend very much time on it, but it's really intriguing. The idea that if you put all human knowledge into a library together, and that includes all mistakes, all misprinted books, everything, all human knowledge, organized, disorganized, and so on, that would have zero information value. You couldn't find anything in there. And it's a very interesting concept. You would think the opposite. Well, all you need is an index, but how do you index something that's infinite? Actually, Marcus and I have disagreed and debated about this slide, but I'm pretty sure that he's right because he knows more about this. So as counterintuitive as this slide will seem to you, I think it's probably right. So the inside process resembles a radiating black hole observed from the outside. Maximally compressed information is indistinguishable from random noise. Too much information collapses. A library, as I've said, containing all possible books has zero information content. Maybe a society of increasing intelligence will become increasingly indistinguishable from noise when viewed from the outside. So Marcus Hutter comes the closest to telling us exactly what the singularity or the post-singularity world is going to be like, but it's not very much fun to think about. So the first is this idea of white noise. If you're not a part of it and you look from the outside, you just see this tremendous white noise because you can't possibly understand what's going on. So each way, the outsiders cannot witness a true intelligence singularity. We don't really know whether it will be mostly inward pointing or outward pointing. It will probably follow the way of least resistance. An outward intelligence explosion will stop when all accessible convertible matter has been used up. And historically, mankind has always been outward exploring. Just in recent times has it become more inward exploring, for instance, as through nanotech and miniaturization and virtual reality. So the conclusion then is strict intelligence singularity is neither experienced by insiders nor by the outsiders. The outsiders just see white noise. The insiders don't notice anything because their own processes are sped up at the same rate as everything around them. So it just seems like normal life. The singularity seems more interesting for outsiders than insiders. For outsiders, they notice the white noise, they notice there's something really weird in there, and the insiders presumably would not see anything. The insiders are actively living the potential societal changes, while the outsiders only passively see them. There are numerous attempts to define intelligence, and actually Marcus Hutter has been sort of at the forefront of this, and in 2007 he provided a collection of 70+ definitions of what intelligence is. It's obviously more than just speed. If you think of a really dumb person thinking really fast, that doesn't quite get you there, right? I mean, it's not just, so it's more than just speed. What will superintelligences actually do? And you can think about it various ways. You know, in the animal species, greater intelligence often leads to greater reproductive success. But, you know, bacteria have enormous reproductive success, and yet we don't think of them as particularly intelligent. So evolution, mutation, recombination, selection increases intelligence if useful for survival and procreation. Animals with higher intelligence, some correlated practical capacity, it increases chance of survival and the number of offspring. But in humans, it's sort of the opposite. The brighter you are, the fewer children you have generally. So it correlates with power and economic success, but actually negatively with the number of children. So the memes, the memetics here, genetic evolution has largely been replaced by memetic evolution. the replication, variation, selection, and spreading of ideas causing cultural evolution. So what activities are intelligence? What activities does evolution select for? Self-preservation, self-replication, spreading, colonizing the universe, creating faster, better, higher intelligences, learning as much as possible, understanding the universe, maximizing power over men and organizations, transformation of matter into computronium, maximum self-sufficiency, the search for the meaning of life. Intelligence could equal rationality, reasoning toward a goal. A more flexible notion is that expected utility maximization and cumulative lifetime reward maximization, that's what intelligence aims for. But who provides the reward and how? In animals, one can explain a lot of behavior as attempts to maximize rewards, pleasure, and minimize pain. In humans, they seem to exhibit astonishing flexibility in choosing their goals and passions, especially during childhood. So in robots, initially at least, we will determine what the rewards are and how they are rewarded. They can be rewarded externally or rewarded through some hardwired system. Goal-oriented behavior often appears to be at odds with long-term pleasure maximization. Still, the evolved biological goals and desires to survive, procreate, parent, spread, dominate are seldom disowned. Evolving goals, initialization, who sets the goal for superintelligence? Anyway, ultimately, we will lose control. It's not a question of maybe, but we will definitely lose control. And the artificial general intelligences themselves, the AGIs themselves, will build further AGIs that are smarter and smarter if they're motivated to do so, and this will gain its own dynamic. So some aspects of this might be independent of initial goal structure and predictable. So you can say, yeah, but we build those initial machines, can't we build in controls and limits and so on? But presumably they would be able to bypass those. So the evolving goals process assume the initial virtual world is a society of cooperating, competing agents. There'll be a competition over limited resources. Those virtual beings who have the goal to acquire them will naturally become more successful in this endeavor compared to beings with different goals. The successful virtuals will spread in various ways and others perish. Soon their society will consist mainly of virtuals whose goal is to compete over resources, right? You might start out with a lot of nice guys and sort of placid, friendly people, but eventually they would presumably lose out. Hostility will only be limited if this is in the virtual's best interest. For instance, current society has replaced war mostly by economic competition. Since modern weaponry makes wars a loss for both sides, while economic competition in most cases benefits at least the better. The goal to survive and spread, whether amount of resources are available, they'll quickly be used up, become scarce, so in any world inhabited by multiple individuals. Evolutionary and economic-like forces will breed virtuals with the goal to acquire as much computing resources as possible. Virtuals will like to fight over resources. Winners will enjoy it while the losers will hate it. In such evolutionary virtual worlds, the ability to survive and replicate is a key trait of intelligence, but this is not a sufficient characterization because bacteria also have that trait. So you can imagine some alternative ways in which things might be structured. There could be a global collaboration with no hostile competition, but this likely requires a single virtual world government and to give up individual privacy and severely limit individual freedom, sort of like big anthills or beehives, and requires a societal setup that can only produce conforming individuals and might only be possible by severely limiting individual creativity, like a flock of sheep or school of fish. Monistic virtual worlds, such well-regulated societies, might better be viewed as a single organism or collective mind. Maybe the virtual world is inhabited from the outset by a single individual. Both virtual worlds could look quite different and more peaceful or dystopian than the traditional ones. Intelligence would have to be defined quite differently in such virtual worlds. Adaptiveness of intelligence. Another important aspect is how flexible or adaptive the individual is. Deep Blue might be the best chess player on Earth, but is unable to do anything else. On the contrary, higher animals and humans, remarkably broad capabilities, can perform well in a wide range of environments. Formal intelligence measures. Marcus ultimately determined that intelligence is the ability to achieve goals in a wide range of environments. So he took those other 70 definitions and tried to sort of distill them down to this. It's an informal definition, implicitly captures most, if not all, traits of a rational intelligence, such as reasoning, creativity, generalization, pattern recognition, problem solving, memorization, planning, learning, self-preservation, and many others. Has been rigorously formalized in mathematical terms. That's the other thing that he's done, is to prove various things through formulas that we won't go through today. Properties, non-anthropocentric, wide-ranging, general, unbiased, fundamental, objective, complete, and universal. It's the most comprehensive formal definition of intelligence so far. So you'd be able to copy or modify virtual structures. So many things that are expensive today would become cheap, and in fact, life would seem to become relatively inexpensive, would have reduced value because things could be copied so easily. Cheap manipulation, experimentation, and copying of virtual life itself is possible. Copying, modifying virtual life, virtual explosion of life becomes much more diverse. In addition, virtual lives could be simulated in different speeds, with speeders experiencing slower societal progress than laggards. And designed intelligences will fit economic niches. Our current society already relies on specialists, so it's natural to go to the next step to ease this process by designing our descendants, that is, designer babies, genetic engineering. The value of life, another consequence would be that life becomes less valuable. Our society values life because life is a valuable commodity, expensive, laborious to replace, produce, raise. We value our own life, since evolution selects only organisms that value their life. Our human moral code mainly mimics this, with cultural differences and some excesses. If life becomes cheap, motivation to value it will decline. So this is a very, very depressing thought. Abundance lowers value. Cheap machines decrease the value of physical labor. Some expert knowledge was replaced by handwritten documents and printed books and so on. Each transition reduced the value of the same information. Digital computers made human computers, humans who were employed to calculate numbers, obsolete. In games, we value our own virtual life and that of our opponents less than real life, because games can be reset and one can be resurrected. Consequence of cheap life, governments will stop paying my salary when they can get the same research output from a digital version of me, essentially for free. Why not risk take? Why not take enormous risks? Why not participate in dangerous, fun activity if, in the worst case, I just have to activate a backup copy of myself from yesterday, just missed out this one, anyway, not very well going day. The belief in immortality can alter behavior drastically. Value of virtual life, countless implications, ethical, political, economic, medical, cultural, humanitarian, religious, and art, well, warfare, and so on, much of our society is driven by the fact that we highly value human individual life. When virtual life is and becomes cheap, these drives will ultimately vanish and be replaced by other goals. If AIs can be easily created, the value of an intelligent individual will be much lower than the value of human life today. So it may be ethically acceptable to freeze, duplicate, slow down, modify, or even kill AIs at will if they are abundant and backups are available. Just what we're used to doing with software. So laws preventing experimentation with intelligence for moral reasons may not emerge. So little value assigned to individual life, maybe it becomes a disposable. Are there universal values then? Are there any universal values or qualities we want to see or that should survive? What do we mean by we? Who's making this decision? All humans? Or the dominant species? Or the government at the time the question is asked? Could it be diversity that we value? Could it be friendly artificial intelligence? Could the long-term survival of at least one conscious species that appreciates its surrounding universe be a universal value? Okay, well now that you're down in this deep, dark, dismal hole of depression with Marcus Hutter's 22 slides, I'm going to try to bring you back up by talking to you about a new holiday, Future Day. First Future Day in Edmonton was in 2012, and this is a picture of it. And you'll get to see and touch and hold that very same banner. This year, we have two of them. Most new initiatives, the person describing it talks about the way it's growing. But that's not what I'm going to do, because this isn't really growing. Because that first year, it was celebrated in 16 cities around the world. Melbourne, Sydney, Hong Kong, Berkeley, Edmonton, Houston, Hawaii, Sao Paulo, and so on. You see the others there. And in subsequent years, I admit this is a great idea and everybody should get on board, but it's actually been celebrated by fewer cities every year. It's possible that in 2015, Edmonton will be the only city celebrating Future Day. I don't think so, but that's kind of the way that we have an idea. In 2016, doing an event at the Art Gallery, and Julie Lin Wong, who teaches in this course and who has run similar events, is keen on this, but we're not going to be ready for that in 2015. So how are we going to determine what we do for Future Day on March 1st, 2015? So these are the only three pictures of the students in this class that this automatic camera has thus far taken. By the end of the course, we'll have hundreds, but I just want the three of you to know it's not like I selected these pictures. These were selected by a software algorithm in that camera. So you guys can help us figure out what our plan should be for Future Day in 2015. It's an example of mature, youthful decision-making, which you are definitely capable of just by choosing this course. You've already shown that you can make some good decisions. So you can do it, and I think we can come up with something that's highly successful. We have a long way to go, as I pointed out in the first lecture. The subject of what we talk about in this course and the subjects talked about in the Big Bang Theory, a TV show, are very similar. Yet 20 million people in the US alone watch the Big Bang Theory, and it's about 35, 40 million worldwide. And we're reaching about 2,700 people with our YouTube videos. So we have a long way to go. So it should be kind of exciting for you guys to figure out how you could help us close this gap between the 2,700 people watching our YouTube videos and the 40 million watching the Big Bang Theory. The singularity has been specifically talked about on the Big Bang Theory in an episode on October 1st, 2010. Woz, the co-creator of Apple with Steve Jobs, was also in a cameo in that program. What would a new holiday need to have? It needs new customs, visual pageantry, new looks and smells and foods and all the sorts of things. If you think of any holiday that you like, any existing holiday, it's got stuff that immediately comes to mind that you like about it, that's unique to it. And without that, this will never succeed. So you need to help me and help us figure out what that can be like. One thing that appealed to me, just because it's not very much a part of our culture here in Canada, is the visual appearances that you get in the Holi festival, probably best known in the Indian subcontinent. Here are some pictures of that. They have these brightly colored pigments that they spray on each other, and it involves everybody in society. It's a very structured society where some groups never talk to other groups. But during this festival, everybody is included. And I'm sure that sounds very wonderful to you, but there's some things about it that are not so very wonderful also. How do you make brightly colored dyes and pigments to sprinkle on people? Well, initially they all came from plants, but it's really hard to find plants with such brightly colored pigments. It's really easy to find them from paint factories, but those are often highly toxic substances. So that's what's commonly used now, all these highly toxic paints. And people get eye disease and skin disease and all sorts of interesting medical conditions as a consequence of having this stuff sprayed on them. And you can imagine circumstances like this. You have not experienced something like this. It'd be quite different from anything you experienced in your life before. I'm not sure that this is at all what we're looking for, this new holiday, but I'm saying it should be something as different from your ordinary life experience as this. Now, I wanted to say that may not do it for you. You may not feel any affinity with the customs of the Holi festival, but if you go to my Facebook page, you'll notice that forever, from the time I joined Facebook, there's only been one poem on that page that I didn't write, and it's this poem. It's called the Crayola Bomb. Maybe we should develop a Crayola bomb as our secret weapon, a happiness weapon, a beauty bomb. And every time a crisis developed, we would launch one. It would explode high up in the air, explode softly, and send thousands, millions of little parachutes into the air, floating down to Earth, boxes of Crayolas, and we wouldn't go cheap either. Boxes of 64 with sharpeners built right in, with silver and gold and copper and magenta and peach and lime and amber and umber and all the rest. And the people would smile and get a funny look on their faces and cover the world with imagination. And if that doesn't do it for you, did you know that the Roomba robotic vacuum cleaner, if you take a time-lapse picture of your Roomba, you get something like that. Isn't that cool? So maybe that would appeal to you. This could be a part of the pageantry of future day. And if that doesn't do it for you, what about a hot air balloon festival? These can be highly colorful. A little bit dangerous if you hit a high tension wire. It's not without risk, but still can be a really cool and visually entrancing experience. And do we need poetry, song? Probably. Do you know the song, The Windmills of Your Mind? Round like a circle in a spiral, like the wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning, on an ever-spinning reel, like a snowball down a mountain or carnival balloon, like a carousel that's turning, running rings around the moon, like a clock whose hands are sweeping past the minutes of its face, and the world is like an apple whirling silently in space, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. You may wonder what this has to do with Edmonton. How can we bring this to Edmonton? Well, I've found a way to bring this to Edmonton, and I'd like you to help me. In every conversation you think might eventually reach a city official, I want you to talk about what I'm going to tell you about next. And that is the fact that in the last year, they've put LCD lights on the high-level bridge, and organizations can make a pitch, they can put in an application to have the bridge lit in certain ways to honor whatever that organization is interested in. So on Future Day, Sunday, March 1st, when you're celebrating with us in eHub, I hope that we will be able to have special lighting on the high-level bridge. What should the colors be? Well, I think the colors should be orange and green. The Future Day logo on the Future Day page on Facebook is basically orange and green. And as it happens, the pictures in the Edmonton Journal article about this course, you remember that article called Street Smart for the Future from April 5th, 2014. That also had orange and green. So I figure, why not? Orange and green is sort of an interesting combination. So the next time you're going by the high-level bridge at night, you can imagine it being in orange and green, and that you helped make it that way on March 1st. And I hope that idea excites you. It would certainly be the biggest effect that Future Day has ever had worldwide. In most cities, it's an extremely limited activity that some academics get together in a room somewhere and give some talks, and there's really nothing external whatsoever. We're the only ones thus far who've done anything that has the least bit of outside activity. So I hope you will help me with that. Your suggestions in general are greatly welcomed. The questions really are very general ones. How can we capture the imagination of the public to start everybody thinking about these matters? We need the mainstream public to regard machines becoming smarter than we are, taking over our jobs, all the sort of practical and theoretical aspects of that, of the technological singularity. We want them to regard that as fact, not fiction. We need to promote organized thinking about the future in universities and beyond. Those of you in this course, you realize you have self-selected yourself. There are like 39,000 people in the university could have taken this course. And there are the small group of you who actually took it. And so what about most of the rest of those 39,000 are mainly focused on the here and now, right? I mean, they don't think 10, 20, 30 years ahead in the future very often. They don't consider that relevant. So I think it is not as if every single person of the 39,000 should be taking this course, but I think we still need to spread the ideas of the course. And please talk up the Light the High-Level Bridge application. You never know which conversation, which of you might have that would make that crucial difference, so the city will say yes to our application.
Okay, well, I guess my question is going back to kind of the more depressing topic. I had read in some other places about this idea, like kind of playing against the idea of the singularity against religion. And I was curious what your perspective was on that. I know there have been arguments about whether or not it can exist with religions like Christianity and things like that.
Sure. No, I think that's a very interesting question. It has some aspects. It has the sort of rapture aspect you can imagine. I mean, something happens at a certain time. And actually, we're very well, equipped to deal with this question of whether this is a religion or how it is like and unlike a religion, because Earl Waugh has spent his entire career in religious studies and that sort of thing. But I think that it is an idea that transcends religion, is compatible with it. For instance, there is a very sizable group, believe it or not, of Mormon transhumanists. So these are people who are devout Mormons on the one hand and really into this idea of machines becoming smarter than we are, and they hold organized meetings twice a year. I've been there, and somehow it seems to work. So I mean, whether it's a religion in itself, I don't really think so, but it has some facets that are a little bit like religion, but it's compatible with other religions. I think the rampant atheist association with it is the least palatable part. I mean, one of the reasons that transhumanists or singularitarian thought doesn't spread more easily, I think, is that it can be really negative in the hands of people who are putting down all religious thought. Not criticizing anyone, but saying being religious at all is just stupid, and no rational person would do that. So I would say that maybe of the active transhumanist singularitarian community, maybe a third are in that category. They assume that to believe in this, you must believe that there is no God. The two are not, compatible. But most other people, Kevin Kelly is perhaps the best example. He's written one of the best books in this area, What Technology Wants. He's, devout Christian, but he's kept all the Christianity for one chapter. You won't find anything about it in the rest of the book. And suddenly he just launches into how all this sort of fits with his, belief. And you'll find that, I think it's a kind of general thing. You find very bright scientists who are deeply religious, very bright scientists who are atheists. The whole spectrum, exists. So I think you can't say that this is not compatible with religion. I think it is potentially compatible. And I don't think it is a religion in its own right, although it has some features of that. It's sort of a, belief system. Earl, am I digging myself into a hole? Do you yes. Okay. Why don't you take the microphone to Earl, and he'll tell us the truth here. We're all waiting. Yeah.
Well, there are obviously many perspectives you can take on this issue, but I think I could remind you that one of the areas of religious belief is the apocalypse.
Yes.
For example, in Christianity, there is a huge movements at various times in the Christian tradition to be concerned about the future, and so the book of Revelation is one of those books that is often read by futurists within, especially the evangelical wing of Christianity. And they often read all kinds of things into the book of Revelation. So, but my point is that this is kind of a secular apocalyptic movement.
Yeah.
And it has its roots in the same kind of futuristic embrace that we find in evangelicals with regard to the future. And one of the interesting things about the apocalyptic movement within Christianity is that it flares up for a while and then it dies down, and then something happens and it flares up, and then it dies down. So in effect, we could expect the same kind of pattern to apply to singularity. That is, there could be all sorts of people who are all of a sudden very interested in it. We've already seen that, incidentally, and in the Future Day thing. Mm-hmm. And everybody was all excited about it, and then it died down. So my point being that the future is something that is not consciously espoused by religions. Religions always focus upon the immediate and upon, how to get you through to the next world. And if religion does focus on the future, it's a kind of distant experience. That is, when you die or something like that, in a kind of future that's not very clear. What Singularity has tried to do is to make that very present in a secular form. So you might argue then that Singularity is a secular, religious, apocalyptic movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that's very interesting. And I think the other point is we are trying to have all points of view represented here. So one of the things I try to do, and I pick new people to speak here, is try to sort of mix it up a little bit to find new vantage points that we have not heard from yet. Because my claim is that this course will teach you about the actual future, because we talk about so many scenarios and points of view that one of them is bound by dumb luck to be correct. We just don't know which one. So, yeah.
My question is also on the first set of slides. And when Mark suggested how the world is moving to singularity, I'm concerned about the power imbalance, and I'm also concerned about the gap between the first world and the third world. Mm-hmm. So is there a given time when the first world moves to singularity while the third world is still trying to catch up with us or with the first world? And even presently, the virtual gap and just the divide between how the access for technology and science in the first world and that same access in the third world is extremely, extremely large. And so presently living here in a first world country, we might assume that singularity is a very, very close phenomena, but that is a completely different situation in more than half of the world. So how can he strongly conclude that this is going to be the case? And yeah, it seems like a case study based on the selected countries.
So I think this gets to another number of things that I'm quite passionate about. One is the whole idea of technology elitism. The Lifeboat Foundation basically has that very idea. They're not trying to save everybody. They're just trying to select a small group, representative group or not, of human beings and fly them off somewhere or help them to survive whatever happens. And that's the whole goal of the Lifeboat Foundation. If you think about it from a diversity point of view, it's absolutely the wrong thing. It's leadership gone wrong, everything gone wrong. The great filter, if you believe in that, the thing that has prevented advanced civilizations elsewhere in the universe from reaching us could also be the same thing. The wrong choice of leaders making the wrong choices about where to go next, not dividing the benefits of technology amongst everybody, but only a select few, and then they fight amongst themselves and, die out before they can reach anywhere. So I think this idea of promoting diversity is very sound. And we talk a lot about global health in this course. It seems odd. The two seem like they wouldn't have anything to do with each other, but they do when it comes to your question. Now, there's the hard takeoff and the soft takeoff. With a hard takeoff, there's a sudden event. And, the day before, there's no singularity, everything's normal. The day after, everything's different, right? So with the hard takeoff, you can imagine that it's not going to be satisfactory for the developing world, the people who have yet to make the first phone call, the people who have never seen a cell phone. No matter how it occurs, if it affects them, but they've had no prior contact, it's going to be a very bad thing, hard to cope with. And if they're somehow left out, that's also bad. So I don't quite see how that would work, a hard takeoff where this thing suddenly happens in the whole world simultaneously. But that's what some people believe. And then the soft takeoff is a more gradual thing. Either way, I think people in the developing world could be left out, but left out of what? If the outcome's bad, they may be the only ones still left standing, right? So if in the developed world everything goes wrong and the machines decide that we are worthless and they wipe us all out, maybe the people who are living in more remote areas will be the only people who actually survive. So there are many different ways to think about this, but as you probably know, I spend a fair amount of time planning and doing things in the developing world. We've helped start a new medical school in Kathmandu, Nepal. So yeah, I think about this regularly. I don't know the answer, but it's a very important question.
This was existentially terrifying. I actually looked at Hutter's lecture yesterday, and it gave me more time for that material to sink in. But I guess I sort of think about how humans evolve, how organisms evolve, compete, and survive in the real world. If we create these machines that are essentially human or have the processing power of a human, what really makes them different from a human? What drives them to enhance themselves, to grow? If you think about competition, then yeah, I'm terrified that this rapidly advancing race of machines would quickly outpace us faster than we could even blink, right? So,
yeah.
Discuss.
Yeah, but you can think of another outcome, which it seems to me is equally likely, that these machines are made by us, and gradually over the next few years, people realize you need really moral people pre-approved by Earl Law and so on, to make these machines, to increase the likelihood that the moral decisions made by the machines will be superior to any that humans can make, but favoring the welfare of the humans that made them. So ultimately, the machine world could have the purest air you can possibly imagine, and things are green everywhere, and pollution is gone, and there's an abundance of everything good. That's possible. That you can imagine, benign, benevolent, really cool machines being in charge of everything, and it's actually a very nice world. So
I'm just thinking, okay, so I'm going to take a totally pessimistic spin here. If that's the case, why haven't humans done it yet? Why aren't humans capable of actually living that reality, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that world would have to somehow benefit the machines
right.
and everything else around
So
them.
the word small-minded is often used for somebody who makes the wrong decision, right? So maybe it's as simple as that. Humans haven't done it because there hasn't been somebody, intelligent enough to kind of be able to consider everything, to take everything into account. And when you take everything into account, when you have the computational power to do that, you're able to make really excellent decisions. So I'm saying this is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't know that this is going to happen, but if we talk about it enough, if we write about it in persuasive enough ways, machines will read what we write. Anyway, I'm just kidding, but we can kind of increase the likelihood that this will be the outcome.